What's the sexiest part of a woman?
Oh my God. Her ass.
What's the sexiest
Her personality.
What's the sexiest part of yours?
Of me?
Yeah.
You've heard their songs on the radio, in video games, on YouTube AMVs that probably broke your 13-year-old heart. Blow Me Away, The Diary of Jane, I Will Not Bow. But here's what most fans don't know. Behind Breaking Benjamin's success was absolute chaos. Addiction that nearly ended everything. A betrayal that tore the band apart. A legal war that turned bandmates into enemies. And a comeback that no one, literally no one, thought possible. So how did a band from a tiny steel town rise to the top of rock, fall into total destruction, and come back stronger than ever? This is the dark, twisted, and true story of Breaking Benjamin. Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It's not Los Angeles. It's not New York. It's a worn-down coal town, better known for factories than fame. But that's where Benjamin Burnley grew up. Awkward, angry, and obsessed with music. He wasn't some rock prodigy. He didn't have rich parents or major label hookups. He just had two things: a brutally intense voice and a name he refused to give up. The first version of Breaking Benjamin, it was a glorified cover band. Weezer, Nirvana, the Beatles, anything that could be played in dingy bars and small-town dives. Eventually, the band fizzled out. Ben packed up, moved to California to chase a dream, and came home broke. But he wasn't done. He linked up with drummer Jeremy Hummel, formed a new lineup, and went back to the name Breaking Benjamin. Why? Because he still had the old logo stickers. Seriously, he didn't want to waste them. No label. No producer, just a name, a handful of demos, and a voice that cut through walls. That scrappy energy, it never left, and it would end up defining everything that came next. In 2002, they released their debut album, Saturate. It didn't break any records. It didn't even break the top 100, but it didn't flop either. It hit number 136 on Billboard, which is kind of insane considering how little support they had. Fans started to notice. Radio started to play the single Polyamorous, and labels started sniffing around. But the real turning point came in 2004 with We Are Not Alone. This was the album that turned heads, and it wasn't just because of the songs. It was because of Halo 2. Their track Blow Me Away was featured on the Halo 2 soundtrack. Think about that for a second. In the early 2000s, Halo wasn't just a game. Kids were staying up all night in online lobbies. Xbox Live was exploding. And suddenly, Breaking Benjamin's voice was everywhere. The line, "Only the strongest will survive," became an anthem, not just for gamers, but for anyone going through shit. Ben's vocals didn't sound like anything else in the genre. They were darker, sharper, somehow melodic and aggressive at the same time. In an era where rock radio was bloated with post-grunge clones and Nickelback knockoffs, Breaking Benjamin hit different. They didn't just sound like Pain, they sounded honest. In 2006, Breaking Benjamin dropped Phobia, and everything changed. The album debuted at number 2 on Billboard. The single, The Diary of Jane, didn't just dominate rock radio, it crushed it. At one point, it was the fastest added song to radio playlists in the history of Hollywood records. This wasn't a slow rise anymore. Hell, it was a rocket launch. But while the music was climbing, Ben was collapsing. Behind the scenes, he was battling severe phobias, especially a fear of flying so intense he avoided tours whenever possible. But even worse was what was happening inside his head. The drinking was out of control. Ben was going on sleepless benders. He later admitted that he would drink until he physically broke down. He said, and I quote, "If I were to keep drinking, then I wouldn't be here." That was the reality. And the sad thing is, that's what I wanted. It just came a little too late. Let that sink in. One of the biggest voices in modern rock was ready to disappear, and nobody knew it. Phobia may have been a success, but it nearly cost him his life. 2009. Ben Burnley is sober for the first time since the band's formation. And now he has to write an album, without the alcohol he thought he needed. Dear Agony was personal in a way that none of their previous albums had been. The lyrics cut deeper, the production was cleaner, and for the first time, Ben was facing his demons without hiding behind a bottle. The cover of the album? His actual brain scan from before he got sober. It was a risk, a huge one. Artists often say their sober album is their worst, because the edge is gone. The chaos isn't there to draw from. But for Breaking Benjamin, the chaos wasn't gone. It was just focused. Songs like I Will Not Bow and Give Me a Sign became instant anthems. Fans connected hard, because they weren't just songs, they were survival. And once again, the album went platinum. But success for this band always came at a cost. And this time, the damage was coming from inside the house. By 2010, Breaking Benjamin was at a crossroads. Ben was clean, the band was successful. But things were about to fall apart from the inside. Hollywood Records approached the band with an idea: release a greatest hits album, throw in a couple of unreleased tracks. Maybe a new version of Blow Me Away, featuring a female vocalist. Simple, right? Well, not exactly. Two of Ben's bandmates, Mark Klapaski and Aaron Fink, agreed to it behind his back. They took a $100,000 payout and gave the label permission to move forward. No meetings, no phone call, no heads up. Ben found out after the fact, and he was furious. In his eyes, this wasn't just a shady move. It was betrayal. Remember, this is a guy who literally built the band from scratch. Hell, he was the founder, the voice, the face, the songwriter. So when he saw his bandmates sign off on new music without him, he fired both of them, by email. And then things got legal. Ben filed a lawsuit demanding $250,000 in damages and full rights to the Breaking Benjamin name. It wasn't just about control, it was about survival. The band was fractured. Public statements were messy. Fans didn't know what to believe. Some thought Breaking Benjamin was over for good. And for a while, it kind of was. While the legal war dragged on, Ben stepped out of the spotlight. No tours, no new music, no updates, just silence. But behind the scenes, he wasn't just fighting lawsuits. He was fighting his own body. Even after getting sober, Ben developed a rare condition called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. It's sometimes referred to as wet brain. In simple terms, your brain starts acting like you're drunk even when you're not. Headaches, dizziness, memory issues, constant fatigue. For a guy already dealing with phobias, anxiety, and the pressure of fame, it was devastating. He barely left his home, couldn't tour, couldn't work. At one point, he said he didn't know if he'd ever return to music. But in April 2013, the lawsuit finally ended. Ben won. He kept full control of the name Breaking Benjamin. And in a public statement, he made it clear, "I'm pleased to finally put this matter behind me. Breaking Benjamin will continue." Most people assumed he was just saying that. But 1 year later, he proved them wrong. In 2014, fans started hearing whispers. Ben was playing acoustic shows. There were new musicians on stage. The old members, gone. The band was alive, but it looked different. Then, in 2015, everything changed. Breaking Benjamin released a brand new single called Failure. The name, perfectly ironic. The track blew up. Fans rushed in. Rock radio embraced it. Streaming numbers exploded. And just a few months later, they dropped a full album, Dark Before Dawn. It was the first Breaking Benjamin album in 6 years, and it debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. Let that sink in. After addiction, after illness, after a public implosion and legal war, Ben Burnley came back and landed the biggest album of his career. The new band was tight, focused, sharp, and the sound, pure Breaking Benjamin. Ben didn't try to reinvent the wheel. He said it himself, "I just want to write good music that stands the test of time." And fans loved him for it. Because through all the chaos, he never lost that voice. If fans thought Dark Before Dawn was the end of the story, they were wrong. In 2018, Breaking Benjamin dropped Ember, and nobody expected what they heard. This wasn't just another rock album. It was heavy, angry, almost metalcore at times. Tracks like Red Cold River and Tourniquet showed a band that wasn't softening with age. They were sharpening. The production was massive. Ben's voice had matured, still intense, still melodic, but with a deeper, darker edge. And the lyrics, as raw as ever. Even critics who had dismissed them in the past were paying attention. For a band over 20 years into their career, to level up like that, it almost never happens. And yet, Breaking Benjamin did it. Without any label hype, without flashy headlines, and without chasing trends. They just made music that hit you in the gut, and they weren't done. You don't always hear their name on rock media lists. They're not headlining Coachella. They don't do flashy interviews. But their influence? It's everywhere. Motionless in White, Starset, Memphis May Fire, all of them, and countless others, have credited Breaking Benjamin as a direct influence. And if you grew up in the 2000s, chances are you heard their music even if you didn't know it. You downloaded AMVs on LimeWire, you blasted So Cold on your iPod Nano, you played Halo 2 with Blow Me Away on loop. Their songs weren't just hits. They were the soundtrack to emotional breakdowns, all-night gaming sessions, breakups, and makeouts. And that's the thing about Breaking Benjamin. They didn't chase clout. They made music for the broken. After Ember, fans assumed Breaking Benjamin would take another long break. But instead of fading into the background, they did something unexpected. They reconnected with their past. In January 2020, they released Aurora, a compilation album unlike anything they'd done before. It wasn't just a greatest hits collection. It was something far more intimate. They took their biggest songs and reimagined them, stripped down, orchestrated, acoustic, fragile. Tracks like So Cold, Dear Agony, and Dance with the Devil got reborn with a haunting elegance. It was Breaking Benjamin like you'd never heard them before. But the biggest surprise? The guest features. They brought in other rock artists to sing alongside Ben, including Lacey Strum, Adam Gontier, and even Scooter Ward of Cold. It was the band's way of honoring their legacy, while acknowledging the community they helped inspire. And in a world where rock felt like it was shrinking, Aurora reminded fans that Breaking Benjamin was still evolving, just on their own terms. And then came one final twist. In 2022, Breaking Benjamin quietly dropped a new single. But it wasn't theirs alone. It was a collaboration with Starset, one of the fastest rising rock bands of the last decade. The song, Waiting on the Sky to Change, it felt like a full circle moment. Starset, often seen as the modern version of Breaking Benjamin, cinematic, emotional, heavy, was now singing with them. The track exploded on rock radio. Fans of both bands came together, and even younger listeners, who hadn't grown up with The Diary of Jane, were discovering Ben Burnley's voice for the first time. It wasn't just a collaboration, it was a symbolic passing of the torch, from the band that defined a generation to the ones carrying it forward. And yet, it didn't feel like an ending. Because Ben, he still sounded like he had something to prove. Let's be honest, Breaking Benjamin was never a critic's darling. They weren't experimental enough for the indie crowd, not heavy enough for the metal purists, too emotional for the tough guy rock fans, too dark for mainstream pop. But that's exactly why they mattered. They existed in that in-between space, the emotional gray zone where millions of people live but few artists speak to. You didn't need to be a scene kid to get it. You didn't need to be depressed or traumatized to connect. But if you were, they felt like a lifeline. Their sound became a template. Listen closely to the vocal patterns in Motionless in White, the brooding ambiance in Starset. Even metalcore bands like Wage War and I Prevail have traces of Breaking Benjamin's DNA in their songwriting. And let's not forget, before Spotify, before TikTok, before Discord communities, it was YouTube AMVs that spread music like wildfire. And Breaking Benjamin was the soundtrack to that era. If you ever saw an anime fight scene cut to Until the End or Evil Angel, you knew shit was about to go down. Ben Burnley never wanted fame. He never played the game. No celebrity relationships, no social media scandals, no flashy interviews. He just wanted to make music and survive. For over 2 decades, he's carried the weight of the band almost entirely on his own. Writing the songs, singing every word, fighting legal battles, touring through illness. He's not flashy, he's not loud, but when he sings, you feel it. There's something raw in his delivery, a permanent edge, like he's always one lyric away from snapping. And that's what makes Breaking Benjamin different from so many other bands that burned out or sold out. Ben never sold anything. He gave what he had: pain, truth, fear, and resilience, and left it all on the record. Breaking Benjamin didn't chase awards. They weren't designed to win Grammys. They didn't tour with U2 or headline Super Bowl halftime shows. They existed in the margins. But that's where they found millions of fans. Fans who were hurting. Fans who didn't fit in. Fans who were tired of fake positivity and radio rock cliches. They never screamed, "We're the best," but they were the most real. And maybe that's why their songs aged better than their peers. Because pain doesn't go out of style, loneliness doesn't become uncool, and healing, that's forever relevant. So, what do we take from all of this? A band from a forgotten town, Formed by a guy who just didn't want to waste his stickers. Exploded onto the rock scene, lost everything, rebuilt from the ashes, and came back stronger. They didn't ride trends. They didn't apologize for being emotional. They didn't sell themselves to algorithms. They just kept showing up, album after album, year after year, with music that never tried to be perfect. It just tried to be true. And that's why Breaking Benjamin isn't just another radio rock band. They're the heartbeat of a generation. And if this is the quiet legacy they leave behind, it'll still be louder than most bands ever managed to scream. If Breaking Benjamin ever helped you through something, if one of their songs ever hit harder than expected, or if you just respect a band that refuses to quit, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about the bands that shaped you. And in the comments, tell me, what's your Breaking Benjamin moment? Because chances are, you've got one. See you in the next one.